All right. Good evening to Nicki de Villiers and Shona Hendricks. Thanks so much for being with us this evening. So all of you are here to join what's going to be, I'm sure, an incredibly important discussion and very informative. Thanks for Nicki for being here. And that is just to discuss the dietary considerations specific to the female athlete. It's something we all have experienced in our careers, all have experienced throughout our lives, and we're very lucky to have both Shona and Nicki here to try and reflect on that and try and paint the picture for us moving forward. So Nicki de Villiers is a dietitian and sports nutritionist. Thanks, Nicki, for being here. And Shona Hendricks is a coach at Coach Parry, as well as a sports scientist, but also a very special interest in the strength and conditioning side. So my name is Hayley Nixon. I'm going to host these two as we go through this evening, and we look forward to lots of interaction from all of you as well. Shona, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Hales. Hales, that was quite a humble little introduction of yourself. What you'll see at the bottom there is Hayley's also a world surf ski champion and biokineticist and coach, so she brings a lot of that aspect to this. But yeah, I mean, the last couple of webinars we've had, a lot of different discussions, and really the one thing we haven't focused on is nutrition. And so really, really excited to have Nicki here. So that's really awesome. And then I'll chime in every now and then from a coach or sports scientist perspective. But yeah, that'll be awesome. We can hand over to Nicki. Thanks, Nicki, so much for being here.
Good evening, all, and thanks so much for the introduction. I'm gonna not spend too much time, saying a lot before I then just going into the a few slides that I prepared, just to get it open. I'm sure you will be welcome to ask questions and use a chat box somewhere to ask the questions as we go along, and somebody will be looking out for those as well. All right, so just to start off with, I think those of you that's been on our previous webinars, previous two, we spoke quite a little bit about this, not a little bit, a lot about Red S, which is the relative energy deficiency in sport, where energy availability is the big thing. And I just want to touch on that again, and maybe just make you aware we're going to talk a little bit about energy balance versus the energy deficiency, or the energy availability. And I think a lot of us know about energy balance, and we've worked with that for a very, very long time. But just to get your minds onto what the difference is between energy balance and energy availability, where the balance is basically an output measure. In other words, that's what I eat. If I deduct the cost of my living from what I'm eating, so the total energy expenditure minus that what I take in, whatever's left is an output measure. And that is usually what we say, that you're either in a positive energy balance, then you will gain weight, or negative energy balance. But the energy availability is a little bit different, and I'm going to do it in simple terms, but it basically refers to our energy intake, and then we deduct the amount of energy that we spend on training from our intake. And whatever we get there is basically the input measure. And with the input measure, I mean that is the amount of energy that's left over to do bodily function, so physiology, to support what we're doing. So the body will always favor exercise. So it doesn't matter how little you eat, you will still be able to exercise, but it's at the cost of physiology. And this is where then we worry. And this can happen in various circumstances. It can be totally unintentional. So we start training harder, but we don't eat more, and therefore we fall behind a little bit, as you can see in the picture at the bottom. And unintentionally just means that the load gets too much for my food. It can be just because we're training harder, but it can also be sometimes we do dietary changes. So you decide you want to go vegan or vegetarian or those kind of things. Not necessarily deciding I'm going to restrict energy, but just change what I'm eating. And that can make you then fall behind in terms of what we're doing. But also with training, there's certain physiological things that happen. So there's often a suppression of appetite that can make me eat less. And then there's also quite a few, and especially in our runners, that we try to cut out food because some of us are not doing well on the road if we have eaten. So that discomfort, either being nauseous or feeling the feeling of fullness or otherwise diarrhea, and that will make you be aware of it and be careful about what you're eating, and in such a way we fall behind. On the other spectrum, we obviously have the people that deliberately restrict energy intake because we want to lose a few kilos because we think we're going to run better. But the problem is, if we do this wrong, we go into what we call LEA. LEA is a low energy availability. And this is where all those really dirty things happen in terms of the physiology and the bone and everything that was discussed last time on the forum. So we don't really want to go into that. So what is important overall in terms of nutrition, if we time our intake well, we can actually prevent a little bit of the bad effects of this low energy availability. So if you're one of those that restrict intake for whichever reason, but if you then make sure you eat in and around your training sessions, you can actually attenuate the bad effect of the low energy availability. So eating before, during, and after, and keeping in mind that our daily nutritional strategies needs to be periodized with our training load. That is very, very important. That if we have a heavy training day of 3 or 4 hours that day, your caloric intake should increase by about 30 to 50%. And I don't think, a lot of us don't think about this. We don't think about how hard are we going to go today and how much must we eat from the time that you wake up. We often do it, as a reward afterwards. So we get through the day, we're excessively tired, excessively hungry, and then we start eating. And with periodizing, your mindset must be eating for what you're going to do, not eating for what you have done in such a way. So in terms of weight loss, it makes sense that we're going to drop the energy availability, so we're going to drop the energy intake, and your body would be fine with it for short periods of time. It's this very long or prolonged times where we don't eat enough that actually does a lot of damage. So we try to achieve whatever you want to achieve in your with your weight and weight loss. Try and achieve it off season. That's very difficult because this is usually the season where we actually just eat whatever we like. And then we periodize across the week. So if there's a heavy load, we eat heavier. If the training load is not that much, we try and restrict a little bit. We need to emphasize that it must be a very slow weight loss, because if you lose weight very slowly I mean about 1.5 kilos a month, maybe 2 kilos a month. But if we lose it in that way, there's very little impact on the physiology. So the bone stays, everything stays intact, and that at the long term will keep you on the road for longer in terms of injury prevention as such. So we need to make sure that it's slow, and we need to make sure that we're realistic. I've worked with a lot of people in practice that wants to weigh a weight that is really just not realistic to support for long periods of time. So this fetish that most of us have, most women have, that the lighter the better, the lighter the better. When you go into a weight loss program, make sure that we're realistic with the goals that you set. Okay, and then we're going to do a little bit and try to connect what we eat to the menstrual cycle. You've seen these slides before, the ones that's been on the previous webinars, or the ones that listened to the other the webinars that they sent to us. But basically, just with this slide, I just want to emphasize that the menstrual cycle is basically based in 2 phases, which we call the follicular phase and then the luteal phase. And that is basically just, the one is from the first day of bleeding up until ovulation, and then from ovulation until you start bleeding again, that will be the luteal phase. And hormones change in these phases, and it's basically the hormones that we then, with very little solid evidence at this stage, but that we're trying to make sense of what's going on. So the estrogen peak just before ovulation, and then another little peak later on in the luteal phase, and then the progesterone that's obviously dominant in the luteal phase, which they often also call the lousy phase, because that's where we actually feel the worst. And we're going to look at these phases and see if nutrition-wise we maybe must not see if we can eat differently in the phases. Just a little bit about energy during the menstrual cycle. So they do quite a bit of studies to see where women eat more, in the follicular phase or the luteal phase, but this is mostly done in a non-athletic population, and that they've seen a greater energy intake during the luteal phase, which actually we're actually supposed to eat a little bit more in the follicular phase. So we're not eating according to our need, but as I said, this is non-athletic populations. So estrogen and progesterone is the 2 hormones and they usually work against each other in terms of energy intake as well as your appetite. So there's usually in the first phase, so the follicular phase, there's a much greater carbohydrate and a lower lipid utilization in this phase. We're also a little bit more carbohydrate sensitive in this phase. So it means that this phase is actually the phase where we're supposed to eat more of those food. Just a few things in terms of female and the use of especially substrates specifically. We know as females we've got a lesser reliance on carbohydrate oxidation during our exercise, so we do make use of more fat and we're much more efficient in it. So all these adaptation techniques that we have in faster trainings and those kind of things, actually, because we're female, we get a lot of those for free. We have to win in some way. So we've got a lesser reliance then on liver and muscle glycogen, especially during endurance training. And we also have quite a larger depot of the fat stores in the muscle, and we also have got a greater capacity to use those fat stores. So that will also make us think, isn't it necessary that we maybe eat a little bit different than our male counterparts? But at the moment, a lot of our research that we have is done on males. So therefore, we do extrapolate to females, and maybe we should look at different nutrients at various stages of the menstrual cycle. Okay, so we're gonna.
Nix, I wonder if I can cut in there, and just to ask you a question that's come through. Given that you've just been touching on how these different stages of the menstrual cycle may invoke, different needs from us. So Cherie's asked here, and I'm gonna repeat it to you as is. I'm curious about how to navigate when you don't feel hungry, as in if you do experience hunger suppression after training.
Yeah, that is such a nice question and so important, because that period after training is extremely important to eat as quickly as possible, because the other thing that in females is quite prominent, we don't have that long phase of recovery. So our metabolism returns to normal much faster than what the male will do. So in those times that we're actually not that hungry, it is important to still get nutrition in, and I find the most practical way would be drinking stuff. So either drinking it in terms of a liquid like a milky drink, or otherwise take a recovery supplement or smoothie or those kind of things. One of the hypotheses for people not being hungry is about body temperature as well, that if there's an increase in body temperature, that suppresses the appetite. So it also does make sense to try and cool down the gut. So try and take cool things, wait maybe 5 or 10 minutes and see if that's not going to go better. Try and fix hydration as quickly as possible, because if we're dehydrated, we're also not that keen to eat. And the other one would just be the emphasis of the training. So if we train hard, there's certain inflammatory markers that will also suppress appetite. But I think if we can get into a routine of doing it and just understand the importance of doing it, if you do it consistently for a few days, you will see that the positive effects that you feel for the next day on the road is so much more than that negative or the discomfort of just forcing food in.
Yeah, thanks, Nicki. That's really practical, because as you say, you can't get into the habit of just not eating. It's such an important part to eat. So those are practical ways that we can maybe change that suppression, or change that feeling of thinking, well, I just won't eat, I don't feel like it. Awesome. Sheree, we hope that's been helpful.
Okay.
Nicki, feel free to continue. Thanks.
All right, so we're going to move into, I'm going to divide the menstrual phase from the 4 phases. We're going to go into, up from the 2 phases, I'm going to go into 4 phases just for the nutrition application. So the first phase is basically the bleeding phase, from the first day of bleeding up until the last phase. The second phase that we're going to do in this first phase is actually the phase where our hormones is quite low. So this is the phase where we hormonally very, very much comparable to males. That there's not a big influx of estrogen or progesterone. Then in the second phase, that is then where the estrogen will peak. This is the phase where usually we're quite strong, and the power here is optimal. You've got a very high recovery rate. So this is the phase where a lot of people will do PBs, although you don't feel on top of the world. But this is where we can really load a little bit of a higher intensity stuff. If you look at the third phase, this is the horrible phase. So this is, as I said, the luteal phase, also referred to as the lousy phase, because this is where we have that little bit of estrogen peak again. But then if you look at the purple line, the progesterone, that obviously goes quite high. And the last phase, that little phase at the end where all the hormones drop again, and that is where we experience a lot of our PMS type of symptoms. So main things that we're going to discuss, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm just going to touch on the estrogen and progesterone. I think it has been discussed previously, but I'm going to just discuss the things that's got an influence on food, on what we need to eat. So usually, as I said, estrogen actually suppresses appetite, and this is where it peaks in that phase 2, is actually where we're supposed to eat a little bit more. So there is a bit of a contradiction here, and there's going to be a little bit of a functional eating that needs to happen here. There's also in this phase, if the estrogen is quite high, there's a decrease of motivation, because estrogen actually crosses the blood-brain barrier and it increases the production of serotonin, and that's basically a neurotransmitter that makes us feel a little bit sleepy and lousy. So the motivation is less. It is although anabolic. So there is better adaptation for strength and muscle recovery, and that is what we can see then in that second phase where the estrogen is peaking. And then the metabolic changes is there's a decreased storage of carbohydrate and carbohydrate access. So in other words, if I've got a glycogen store, this glycogen store, it's difficult to access in this phase. So therefore, we have to look at especially carbohydrates feeding in this phase, knowing that I can't rely on a tank that much. There's obviously also the water retention that goes with it in the vasoconstriction, and a little bit of an increase in blood pressure. So this is where the estrogen is dominant. If we look at the phases where the progesterone is dominant, we're in a much, much more stable mood. There is, although, an increase in the basal temperature, the body temperature. That's got an effect then on how we deal with heat, especially in that period. And then also got a huge effect on hydration and what we should do with hydration. It does slow down digestion, so there's often GI discomfort with a little bit of either constipation, bloatedness, or diarrhea. And it does, the increase in progesterone that does cause us to lose more sodium, and that can lead to a high risk for hypernatremia. So the rehydration that we do in this period has to have electrolytes in it. Also a little bit of catabolic phase, so there's an increase in muscle breakdown, so that can also give us a little bit of an increase in muscle soreness, and this is where the protein becomes so important. So just from that overview, just to get a little bit more practical into food. So if you look at what happens in phase 1, usually there is an increase in fatigue, and this fatigue can be because of a decrease in sleeping pattern, but it's also with the blood loss, there's sometimes iron loss, and that can lead also to iron deficiency. So what we really concentrate on here in phase 1 is there is a substance available which is called tart cherry juice. So it's made from the very sour cherries, and that can actually decrease the fatigue. So if you have that available, you can have it. So it's either they sell it in a juice type of a bottle, or you get a little shot. It looks like a gel that you can take to try and alleviate the fatigue. What will also help is Prebate protein, because remember, fatigue is because of the estrogen crossing the blood-brain barrier. So if we have a Prebate fatigue, we actually increase the tryptophan that works against this process. So to have a Prebate snack with protein in it, milky protein is usually quite good because it's quite high in leucine, that will counter this effect. And then iron-rich foods. I did put some iron-rich food examples for you on the slide, but it's usually, we distinguish between what we call heme iron and non-heme iron. The heme iron is the stuff that's much more available to the body. In other words, the absorption is much better, where the non-heme iron sources, the absorption is not great, but I mean, it is okay. You will be able to survive on it, but you have to be very specific in the sources that you take. So it is important to up maybe the iron-rich food in this phase. The other thing that happens in phase 1 is muscle soreness. Usually, the muscle soreness is because of a little bit of an inflammatory process that's going on and the increase in protein breakdown. So the ideal would be to counter that through protein feeding, especially post-training, bringing us back to that question that I've answered, that protein intake post-training is extremely, extremely important. And I will get to the amount soon. And that if we take a protein source that contains leucine, leucine is a specific amino acid. It's part of the BCAAs, or the branch chain amino acids. And it's very prominent in dairy food, like the milk or whey protein or casein. but also in quite a few other things. Those of us that's vegetarian, also you can get in soybeans. So there is other sources of it, a lot of seeds and nuts also. The other thing that we can then include in the diet to alleviate muscle soreness is the omega-3 fatty acids. That's the anti-inflammatory effect that it has on the body, and that's usually our fatty or oily fishes that contains most of our omega-3 acids, like mackerel, kipper, pilchard sardines for the local people. But then also, if you're vegetarian or vegan, usually the inclusion of something like walnuts, rapeseed oils, and then the seeds and nuts usually contains quite a little bit, quite a lot of these omega-3 fatty acids. So therefore, eating that on a regular basis, maybe a practicality is to maybe mix a seed nut mixture, keep it in your kitchen whenever you eat a bowl of yogurt to add it, or whenever there's a porridge to add a spoon of the nuts and seeds so that you can get it on a daily basis. The other thing that happens in phase 1 is the appearance of headaches, cramps, gastrointestinal discomfort. And here, again, the omega-3, quite important, but also magnesium. Magnesium is quite a wonder food for females. So magnesium, luckily the one very good source of magnesium is dark chocolate. So that will give us quite a bit of an excuse. But bananas, avos, almonds, also nuts, seeds, whole grains like oats, those are our high magnesium foods. So quite important to include that in that time. Look at the salt intake. So if there's excessive bloatedness, not to eat excessive salt, but also be aware that not to use the diuretics or those kind of things to try and get rid of the bloatedness. Functional hydration, it means, with functional hydrations, we mean a drink that contains a carbohydrate plus a salt, so electrolytes in it, because with the functional hydration, it means your body is actually going to retain the fluid much, much better. And that should actually give us a much better hydration to take care of especially some of the headaches. The headaches occur because of vasoconstriction, and if we have enough fluid in there, that will then take care of the headaches. So that would be in phase 1. That is the bleeding phase. Phase 2, remember, that was the phase where the estrogen now goes up and peak nice and high. And the main thing here that happens is the estrogen cause that you're much more prone, it's laxity in the ligaments and the tendons, so you're much more prone to these kind of injuries. So it has been proposed that during this phase that we eat much, much more food with collagen, gelatin, and vitamin C. So those three are always used basically in one sentence, that we use it as a combination of stuff. So the collagen-rich foods would be something like bone broth, organ meat like liver, spirulina, eggs, and tinned fish. But then we also got food that actually just boosts the collagen formations. Remember, collagen is a protein. So food that boosts the collagen formation is quite important, because all the protein is digested into amino acids, and then your body has to bake it again at some other stage. So these would be the leafy green, the pumpkin, and sesame seeds. So this is, for instance, one of the areas where you can mix the pumpkin and sesame seeds and make sure that during this phase that we eat a spoon of it every single day. Also strawberries, unfortunately, is seasonal. Citrus fruits also seasonal, and then garlic. The gelatin, the indication is to basically take gelatin 60 minutes prior to your training session, and to include 15 grams a day of it. So you basically make a jello or jello block, where you can mix the gelatin, the water, a little bit of salt, and then you can use any fruit or fruit juice and make it in like a jelly block, and have some of that in 60 minutes before you go into training. You can make use of collagen powder. Just remember that if you use the collagen powder in the gelatin, collagen cannot be heated. So therefore, you have to make it cool down a bit and then stir it in when it's lukewarm. If you want to set it as part of your jello as such. But you can use collagen separately in smoothies or homemade protein bites and so forth. The other thing that happens in
Nicki,
space.
Sorry, Nicki, I want to jump in there just on between phase 1 and phase 2, and particularly like you're mentioning around the ligaments and tendon and injury joints. It might just be a nice time just to pop it in there to say that a lot of that reasoning is also because of the neuromuscular effects around this phase. And I think that from a training perspective, it's a really important time to, I mean, not that you shouldn't be focusing on your warm up at any other time, but perhaps in this phase, it's a really good time to focus on a good mobility and neuromuscular warm-up because of this extra sort of risk as well. And it's also to say that between phase 1 and phase 2, these are pretty good times to maximize some form of training as well. We're saying that there's an injury concern. That's not necessarily saying that you must hold back on your training per se in this time, but perhaps use some strategies to help mitigate some of that.
Thanks, Shona. That's so true, because this is also the phase where we can really hit power quite nicely. So it does take a little bit of planning, and just, as Shona said, be careful in terms of the warm-up maybe and the cool-down and proper stretching.
If I can also just add one more comment there from our poll, I just think it's interesting for everyone to quickly reflect. And Nicki, you probably wouldn't have seen the results yet. Almost 65 to 70% of our answers have come through to say people aren't changing their dietary intake depending on the menstrual cycle. So hopefully, based on how much content you're giving here and what we could actually be doing per phase, we could change a lot of that. So just to next, obviously you're welcome to give your comment on that, but also just to tell everyone listening, we are following and tracking your questions, and we will get to them. But there's just been such great content from Nicki. We want to hear more about these phases, and then we will get to those questions.
All right, thanks so much. I think there is a little bit of at the moment. So a lot of what I'm presenting here is suggestions, and it's not. We don't have clear-cut recommendations, and I think that's why it's not easy for people to really change. And I think the other thing, we're human, guys. I don't know if I'm going to track every week, and this is sunflower seed week, and this is sesame seed week, and this is collagen week. So I think it's going to be a little bit difficult to really track according to that, and that's why sometimes none of these things can do harm. So sometimes it makes sense to change your day-to-day intake and include some of these things on a day-to-day, on a daily basis as such. Okay, another thing in phase 2, there's a decreased motivation. So again, that protein, remember if I talk about motivation, protein will help, because the motivation is because of what's happening in the brain, and the protein does counter that. So leucine dominant thing, or the use of the BCAA. I also put a little bit of a table in there that it's actually quite easy to get leucine through food intake. Leucine is we don't necessarily have to supplement a leucine supplement, but you will see that it's in a lot of our food sources that we eat on a day-to-day basis, and we usually apply that. We want to get to about 3 grams of leucine, and if you look at the table there and what's in there, it's about a chicken breast that will give you the leucine that you need. But the timing thereof is extremely important, and we'll get to that in a bit of time. The other one in phase, if we then move to phase 3, remember phase 3 is now after ovulation. Now we get that lousy phase where the progesterone will peak, but also a little bit of a later peak of the estrogen again, but the progesterone now is dominant in this phase. There's a lot of mental fatigue. We feel tired and, as I said, lousy. Again, the leucine and the branched chain amino acids should help in this phase. In this phase, we also get hungry, and this is where our carb cravings comes from. So it is physiological that you will crave carbs. There's usually increase in metabolic rate in this phase, and that is why we crave more of these things. But also, we do allow ourselves to eat a little bit more in this phase. It will happen automatically if we just take care of cravings. In other words, eat a little bit and work on the skill to stop, and not just think, okay, I had a bite and therefore I did everything wrong and now I just go into the whole slab. So if we control it quite nicely, but that should take care of the hunger and the carb cravings, and then also with the distribution of food, that we eat regular meals at regular intervals, and every single meal that we eat have a protein combined with the carb that we take in. In other words, you'll have apple with nuts, or you'll have raisins with sunflower seeds, or an apple with peanut butter, or toast with cheese. So to make sure that we do those combinations. We also experience a decrease in immunity in this stage. So usually the immunity is enhanced with the intake of glutamine and zinc. I think zinc has been quite in a prominent role throughout the COVID stories. Everybody was on zinc supplementation. Not always that sensible, because too much zinc can actually suppress the immune system. But zinc will be in a lot of our seeds, our nuts, almonds, eggs has got zinc, oysters has got zinc. So it is widely spread in food. So that's why I'm so eager to just have a healthy guideline in terms of healthy diet for every day, and then emphasizing obviously the variety of stuff. Glutamine is an amino acid, it's a non-essential amino acid, so your body can make it, but also widely distributed in broccoli, cabbage, but also in meat, cheese, those kind of sources. The other thing that happens in our phase 3, which is quite important and we need to pay attention, and this is the delayed sweat response. Remember, in this phase of progesterone increasing, our basal body temperature increases. We also have a delayed sweat response. So this is the phase where heat training really, you feel it. There's a very high increase of rate of perceived exertion in terms of heat training in this period. So we have to make use of cooling hydration, with other words, drinking something like slushies or cold fluid as such, but also make sure that there's enough fuel in the fluid that you drink. Remember, if we experience heat or you train in a warmer environment, then you do burn more carbohydrates. So it is important that during this phase that we make sure that we fuel properly. That will also take care of the cravings if you fuel within your session. The other one is the muscle soreness. So that's, again, the leucine before and after your training set will help with the muscle soreness. That will prevent you from breaking down too much protein in your training set as such. The bloating and the water retention, again, remember we spoke about the omega-3, the magnesium sources, as well as the zinc sources. Make sure in terms of salt. So this is a period where it's quite interesting, where a lot of people in practice will ask me, I feel bloated or I feel I'm retaining water, and they want to use diuretics. And that's actually the worst thing to do, is to use a diuretic. So it makes rather sense to do a fluid which contains salt. You don't want to get rid of the fluid but not the electrolytes, because that's going to make you feel worse. So we rather, and if you use a diuretic, that is often what happens. So rather have liquid with an electrolyte in it. So a normal sports drink usually contains electrolyte plus a fuel in this period of phase 3. The other one is the feeling, you're feeling quite flat whilst you're training, this lousy feeling. So again, if in this feeling we in any case have extra carbohydrate cravings, to put a lot of that carbohydrate as sugar in your training is going to benefit you quite a bit, because first of all, you're going to use the sugar, and second of all, you do curb the craving quite a bit if there's sweet things then in the diet, but then you do it during your training sets. And then the increase in sodium losses. So the problem here usually is that we have to then replace sodium losses, again, the salting of food, so eat a little bit more salt on food, or otherwise the drinks containing the salt, again with functional hydration, and then make sure that we pre-hydrate before we go onto the road or into the training session. So make sure your hydration is fully put. I will talk about this in the context of pre-training intake in a little while. Phase 4, then remember, phase 4 was the sudden drop in all your hormones. It's a very short phase, so it's not that long, but we do, again, suffer from fatigue. So that would be the tartary juice again, and that pre-bed protein snack, which can be beneficial. The inflammation and the muscle soreness that appear in this period can be countered by, again, having the omega-3, either through food intake or then supplement as such. And then the other thing in terms of headaches and dehydration, there's vasoconstriction again in this period, so we do suffer from a little bit of headaches. There's also a little bit of a decrease in the blood volume. So what we can do to try and counter it, to eat something that's high in nitrate. So nitrate actually dilates the artery, so it works against the constriction. And this would be green leafy stuff. You will see a few examples at the bottom. But most of the studies in terms of nitrate is being done on beetroots, okay, beetroot juice, or eating beetroots in this stage, or anything of kale, lettuce, but a dark green kind of lettuce. That will help to increase the nitrate, and that will dilate the arteries so that we feel better. The other one is to have watery stuff in this period, to eat stuff that's quite high in water, and that includes most of our fruit and vegetables. I think most of you would know about watermelon being quite a good example to eat in this phase. All right, the other thing that happens in phase 4 is usually that we can have periods of depression or anxiety, and that's again to do with the blood-brain barrier. So again, the leucine before training, and then the branched-chain amino acids. There's been a question of what is a pre-bed protein. So any protein source that you eat before you go to bed, so an hour or so before you go to bed, that can be in the form, or most of the stuff that we prescribe is milky proteins, like drinking a glass of milk before you go to bed, or drinking or eating a cup of yogurt before you go to bed. Some people will have a nut snack or a nut and seed snack before they go to bed, or otherwise leftover supper often happens. You know, there's a piece of chicken leftovers, so we eat before we go to bed. So that would be a typical example of a pre-bed protein snack. There's a question also in terms of, is the chocolate milk good for recovery? Yes, it is. I will get to the recovery later on, but just now, for instance, the chocolate milk contains all the correct, especially protein, to make it a very, very good recovery as such. The cramps, again, and the gastrointestinal discomfort and the diarrhea that we experience, again, is the zinc, the magnesium, the omega-3, and make sure that you do take care of hydration in this period. So in summary, all right, what must we do in phase 1? Eat more iron food, iron-containing food. So if you do this meatless Mondays and, you know, periods where you do veganism or periods where you do plant-based eating, try, if you do it only for periods, not to do it in that period, so that when we're in that phase 1, we can get good animal sources of good quality iron sources. Magnesium, the magnesium is right through, so I will carry on with magnesium, and I will also make sure that I eat omega-3 fatty acids right throughout all the phases, because the anti-inflammatory aspects therefrom is valuable. Phase 2, then I would definitely do the collagen, gelatin, and vitamin C feeding. I would reserve for phase 2. I wouldn't actually take it right throughout. It is a little bit of effort, so therefore I think phase 2 will be reserved for that. Can you not put collagen in your tea or coffee? You can put collagen in tea or coffee, but then it must be lukewarm. You can't put it in a hot tea or coffee because it denaturates protein. So rather than in a glass of juice or in a smoothie, would work much, much better. Phase 3 then, a lot of emphasis on the protein, especially protein after training, extra carbohydrate for the cravings, and then we add a little bit of the salt and electrolyte drinks, and the same with phase 4, also looking at the fluid status, but the omega-3 and the magnesium also important. So if you look at these phases, guys, there's not that much. We should concentrate on good, solid eating of a variety of food, a lot of fruit, a lot of vegetables, include nuts, include seeds, and do make use of protein, but especially the timing of the protein. All right, I'm going to go to a little bit more practical, and I'm going to hurry it up a bit. So looking at what to have before, during, and after training. So before training, make sure that we have something before we go and train, especially in females. It's very, very much underwritten that females are not really built for faster training. And a lot of the faster training that people prescribe is trying to get adaptation so that we deal with fatty acids better. And as I said, as females, we are built to work better with fat. So therefore, it's really not a necessity to do faster training, which a lot of us would be quite glad for. So we usually take about a 40 gram of carbohydrate portion. So 40 gram of carbohydrate portion, about a cup of cereal with milk in it. You can put a spoon of honey with that, and about 10 to 15 grams of protein. 10 to 15 grams would be a cup and a half of milk, or otherwise you use a cup of milk with the cereal and you add 1 or 2 spoons of sunflower seeds to the cereal, and you're good to go. In terms of hydration, you take 5 to 7 milliliters of fluid per kilogram of body weight. That's for about 4 hours prior to, so that's for those of us that train in the afternoon. For those of us in the morning, it usually equates to about 3 to 5 milliliters of fluid per kilogram of body weight. And if you're in the high hormone phase, the luteal phase, to then add the branched chain amino acids. Okay, that's when we refer to that phase as phase 3. Okay, and that is where we add the branched chain amino acids pre-training to minimize the fatigue that we experience and make sure that we're fully hydrated. So that is before training. If you look at what to do during the training, then if you train for less than 60 minutes and you did eat before your training, there's no need to fuel, to take extra carbs in that training set as such. Depends obviously a little bit on the weather, but there's no need. If you go over 60 minutes, then you need to we take carbohydrate intake. Usually we work with about 25 to 35 grams of carbohydrates. You start fueling early. So I know I'm going to be out there for 90 minutes. So really don't wait until the 60th minute and now we start fueling. Start fueling early and then do it at regular intervals every 30 to 45 minutes. And then we're up to about 40 to 50 grams per hour, depending on how hard you're going to run. You can add protein, especially ultra endurance people. We try to add protein to that drink. So it's usually in the form of a peptide. You're not going to really run with a chicken leg. It's going to be in the form of your drink, and it's usually in the form of peptide or amino acid that they add to that. The hydration then, there's two schools of thought. The one would say drink according to thirst or ad libitum, and the other one would work on schedule. It is important that you see what works best for you. So thirst usually is a good indicator, but only if thirst and fluid connect at the same spot. No. So if I am thirsty and I'm running laps and my bottle is, 4 kilometers away from me and I'm thirsty now, it's going to be really hard to keep yourself hydrated. So please plan your fluid intake properly. And it usually boils down to about 250 mils to about 500 mils every hour. Somebody asking if it's necessary to eat breakfast if you're a morning runner. Is it healthy to eat after 11 or 12 in terms of intermittent fasting? Oh, yes. Okay, so this is my favorite question. And the answer is yes, it is necessary to eat breakfast. And I like the word that you use, it's necessary. It is necessary. Okay, so the breakfast must be before you run. The run is going to be much, much better. The problem is, as females, if we do intermittent fasting, there's a neuropeptide that will increase, and that actually create a hell of a lot of stress on the body. And that stress on the body actually is to the detriment of your performance, not to the benefit thereof. So it is important to eat, please. Intermittent fasting, I'm not that keen on the principle of intermittent fasting. It does, although, depend on what reason you do it for. If it is for a reason that I want to increase my insulin sensitivity, I'm all good for it. But guys, please don't use intermittent fasting as a way in which to lose weight. It does not help us towards weight loss. And this is, you can see most of the studies will tell you that it does not help for weight loss, maybe for insulin sensitivity as such. If you look in the recovery, which is probably the most important one, we want to also include then 30 to 40 grams of of protein. I thought that's leucine. 30 to 40 grams of protein, which contains quite a bit of leucine, within 30 to 40 minutes after training. This is the cornerstone for female recovery. Okay, is the intake of that. Also, then adding your carbohydrate source to that and adding your hydration. Make sure that we start hydrating as soon as possible. And that's why it's sometimes much, much easier. Reflecting on the question of Hayley with the appetite to rather drink this drink. And this is where the chocolate milk comes in to answer that question as well. So chocolate milk contains the protein that we want, the carbohydrate that we want. There's electrolytes in it, salt in it, and there's fluid in it, which will make it an absolutely perfect recovery drink. But guys, this doesn't mean we drink 200 mils of chocolate milk. And that is quite an insult to the body for the work it's done, to give it 200 mils of milk and say, okay, you go recover. So drink proper amounts of this recovery drink. Also, try not to use anti-inflammatories or antioxidant-rich food if your whole goal is in terms of adaptation of these systems. But the carb, the protein, and the liquid, that stays in all circumstances. This will make a huge difference in performance. Just a few things on the weight issues. I just know we never talk to females without talking about weight. I wish we could get off this, but it usually is part of the package. And just to make you aware that one of the big things that influence weight is basically energy. If we look at energy balance, if you take more energy than what you spend. But the problem, it's not that easy. So if you look at calories in, calories out, if I work on the one side of this balance scale, the other side is influenced. So if I decide I'm going to eat less, the body will automatically also decrease the expenditure. So it decrease the basal metabolic rate, it will decrease the thermic effect of your activity, It will make you lazy and ask you to sit down. So, and if on the other side, if I want to increase expenditure to try and lose weight, automatically I will get hungry on the other side. So this balance is not two separate things that we always have to consider. How is what I'm doing on the one side influencing on what I'm doing on the other side? So in terms of a good quality weight loss, we want to create that negative energy deficit. Don't go from 0 to 0. So if, say, for instance, you're currently eating 10,000 kilojoules, don't drop it to 6. I mean, that would be, if I halve your salary in your working space, you're also not going to be happy. So the body is not going to be happy if you all of a sudden take half of its fuel away and say, there we go, nice long run on a Saturday morning. So make sure that we create a deficit, but a small one, not a big one. As such, we do make use of a higher protein intake, and then we do, if we have to eat less and we have to up protein, something's got to give. And the thing that usually is got to give is a little bit of the carb as well as the fat content. We make sure that we eat protein after exercise, and when we're in a weight loss mission, we make sure that we eat protein every 3 hours in combination with the carbohydrate as a snack. Make sure that the foods that we eat has got a low energy density. In other words, low kilojoules, a lot of nutrients. So we eat, vegetables, raw vegetables, those kind of snacks. But to try and drink Coke and cold drinks and those kind of things with a very, very high energy content, or sugar with coffee with 4 teaspoons of sugar, those are all energy dense stuff that doesn't bring nutrients into the diet. So you've got to be hungry all the time if you try and fill up for that. So time your food intake around your training sets as far as possible, and then monitor the consumption of the energy drinks that we have every single day. Somebody said they was told that post-training I should have carbs and protein, but absolutely no fat for the first hour because it slows the digestion of the carbs to the protein and delay the getting those nutrients into the system. So that is it is a bit true, but it's not that the body is not going to absorb any of it. So that is important. Also, maybe a thing that I need to mention here, that if you drink the chocolate milk within 2 hours, we're going to have a meal in any case. So it's not that you can't have any fat whatsoever. And usually the chocolate milk, if you take a low-fat chocolate milk, it's usually 5 grams of fat on a whole cup of milk. So it's really not that high. I would not necessarily use cream and butter and those kind of things in the meal. But the natural occurring fat in food, I don't think is a problem. So please make use of the chocolate milk. It shouldn't be a problem. Okay, I think that is me in terms of the slides. Now I am open for questions, and I've seen there's quite a few coming in. I just don't know where to find them.
Hayley will jump them up for you, I'm sure. But maybe Hayley, so if I can interrupt just on the weight aspect, Nicki, and it maybe it's something we haven't covered tonight necessarily, but with peri and post menopause, obviously weight is quite a concern. How would your advice there differ towards someone in perhaps post menopause? Okay,
so there it becomes very important. I think the one thing there is the hormonal stuff is not there, so all that cravings and all those things doesn't play that much of a role anymore. But what we try and do with those in that situation, remember, because we're postmenopausal, we're a little bit older, your basal metabolic rate is lower, so we don't need that much energy. So we have to eat less, full stop. But in that eating less, it is important to still make use of a very high quality protein at regular intervals and smaller amount of carbs. And then your carbohydrate, there's a lot being written, but it's not, a definite hit, but that we do a little bit of I don't want to use the word carb cycling, but that's what it is. We just basically, we give carbs in the front part of the day around your training excessively, but then we flatten it towards the back end of the day, so that when we go into afternoon snacks and supper time, that we try and limit the carb intake there. But it's by no means a low carb diet. We just put it in and around training as much as we can.
We did actually have a question sort of similar along those lines, Nicki. Jennifer commented here, I eat my main meal at lunch. Do I still need to eat something before I train in the afternoon?
So the indication is if you 2 hours out, so if you haven't eaten 2 hours before you run, the answer is yes. So if the lunch is at 12, my run is at 4, yes. If lunch is at 12, my run is at 2, Maybe, depends on what was lunch, but try to always eat in the 2 hours before you go eat your training.
Okay. Nicki, also, I think we've got a few vegetarians that have joined us this evening, and it's come up quite a few times, alternatives for sort of proteins.
Yes.
So any suggestions for iron, especially if you're a vegetarian, besides supplementation?
Yeah, I prefer them eating food instead of supplementation. It's there just to be clever. So there is iron in a lot of sources that we eat. We just need to be clever in terms of also how we mix it. So if you look at a lot of spinach has got a lot of it in the beetroot has got quite a bit, the raisins has got quite a bit. So a lot of our fruit and vegetables has got iron in. I think if we're vegetarian, we just need to be very aware in terms of that we don't do anything to limit the absorption of the iron sources. And that especially, I mean, there's a lot of things, but the ones that I want to emphasize is not to have coffee, tea, or milk with any of your meals. That is quite important. If you want to drink something, rather a juice containing vitamin C. So it's not that there's not enough iron, there is enough iron. It's just that we have to optimize the absorption thereof. Another thing that can limit the iron absorption is excessive amounts of fiber, which sometimes with the vegetarian diet can be evident, especially if they're going to use whole grain stuff, like brown rice or whole grain starches with spinach, which is then their main iron source. That can be a problem. If they make use of cereals and those things, there's also iron in there. Again, the absorption is a little bit hampered because of the milk that you add to the cereal. So that's in terms of the iron. If I talk about protein sources, there's quite a lot of vegetarian protein supplements that people can use these days. You get the hemp protein and there's pea protein and all these protein sources. But I do believe that supplementation is not a necessity. You can get it through food. So you would work with chickpeas, you would work with lentils, roast chickpeas in the oven, have that as your snack in between. Seeds, seed and nut mixes, those are all quite good sources that you can include also in your food as such. If you make a stir fry and there's tofu in the stir fry, to add some seeds or nuts to whatever you're doing, and then using the soy milk as a substitute for milk.
Great. That's good to know. Another interesting one, and Shona, maybe you can also come in here, although Nicki will bring the nutrition side of it, is that can our nutrition affect or help prevent DOMS? So for those of you listening, DOMS is delayed onset muscle soreness. And I'm sure all of us have had that either from a big or a heavy training session or even just a weight session. And that might tie in a little bit with some of the kind of PMS symptoms. Are there dietary intakes we can help with that?
Yeah, I think in terms of, first of all, looking at them, fueling your training well so that we don't have excessive muscle breakdown. I think that's point number one. A lot of people suffer with extreme pain just because we didn't fuel. So we will do a fasted run and we'll do it too fast, or we'll do hill training without eating carbs. Then obviously you're going to break down more muscle that will aggravate it. But yes, in terms of trying to overcome it, I would definitely do protein and leucine after my training set, and definitely the intake of omega-3 fatty acids. A little bit of this tart cherry juice has been implied, but the studies didn't look exceptionally stunning. So I would stick to those three: omega-3, leucine, protein.
Good.
I think
Shona, sorry.
Yeah, just from, I think your point is clear. I think that sometimes there's often a confusion between DOMS and just general kind of stiffness. And I think that, what you're saying there is essentially you can feel it so that the intensity of the session that you're experiencing, you might not experience as much sort of muscle damage afterwards, but essentially once it's gotten to DOMS, that's a 7 to 10 or 14 day period thereafter that is going to struggle, and that is 100% based on the intensity and how hard you are working in that session or how long it's been since you last worked in that session, and so that will affect that completely.
Okay, so on the recovery phase, we often get asked sort of, what, or at least the duration phase of training, what should people be taking? And Andrea's asked here, could coconut water with natural electrolytes be preferable to your high sugar energy drinks, which I think is coming up a lot lately?
Yeah, so the coconut water, in terms of it does contain electrolytes, but it's not really enough of the electrolytes, and it does make sense that if we do take a functional hydration drink, if I can put it like that, I think what is important of the question is that we need to distinguish between two things. Is it a run that hydration is dominant? So is it hot, humid, hard out there? Or is it a run that's maybe not that hot and humid, but it's still a hard run? So the one you would basically mix something that is much more for the hydration part of it, and the other one would be much more for the fuel part of it. That needs to be considered. But a lot of the coconut waters that I've looked at and that I've seen, the electrolyte content is not enough to achieve that we want to achieve. On the other hand, you compare it to a sports drink. I also don't want us to now dilute a sports drink to dilute the sugar content, because you're also diluting the electrolyte content. So in a way, we maybe get to a point where you mix your own stuff. You know, you take so many spoons of sugar that you need in there with so many, quarter teaspoon of salt that I need in there, and you go and run with that. I'm very aware if we start making or mixing drinks, and you don't use whatever they propose, so we make it a little bit weaker, because we try and limit sugar, but then we also don't get enough of the electrolyte.
So Nicki, from an athlete perspective, I mean, we see it all the time, people reaching for the nearest Energade or Powerade or Gatorade. Are you then implying that we try and distinguish between sessions where we just need to rehydrate on fuel versus on fluid and maybe electrolytes, versus where we're actually trying to get fuel in or food in, like a liquid?
Yeah, yes, because that is what I say. We need to periodize. We need to think about what we're going to do and eat according to that. So very often, if you do a 30-minute, or say we do an hour run, but it's in a hot and humid condition, and I'm not acclimatized to that condition. I go to Durban for the weekend, and I want to go and do a run. It won't be necessary to fuel that run, but it will be definitely necessary to hydrate that run, because I won't be comfortable. I'm not used to that. So you need to ask yourself, what do I need on the road? It's very often that you also then have to consider in that package of where is my store. So what is my fuel gauge at the moment? So when last did I train? How hard did I eat after that training? Did I withhold carbs after the training? Say at a late afternoon training, I didn't eat carbs at night. And then if you have to go on the road in the morning, even if it's just going to be an hour, I'm still probably going to need fuel for that hour. So you need to gauge as well what is left in the body. So therefore you need to think what happened. Somebody's asking, is an electrolyte drink like Rehydrate recommended for pre, during, and after? So electrolyte drink is quite a good drink to have. So the electrolytes is quite high. Rehydrate does not have a lot of carbs in it. So I would, if I drink Rehydrate, would be perfect for an hour run. But if I'm going to run an hour and a half, I don't think a Rehydrate is going to get you there. So you're going to have to add maybe fruits or dates or a bar or something like that to the drink. So eat the solid and then run with the drink. We are moving towards, I think, where a lot of people prefer to have real food as well, and moving away from the excessive amounts of gels, especially in females. The gels doesn't work that well, but it's gels and drinks and little shots that a lot of people nowadays prefer more solid food, especially in the ultras. Hey, to eat potatoes or to eat a sandwich or to eat something like that.
If I can change our sort of tangent a little bit, and we have Kat's asked this question. I think, Shame, it's the second time she's brought it up now, and we've touched a bit on it in previous webinars. But Nicki, with you here on the nutrition side, the question is wondering about the progesterone-only pill. Does it have an effect on what was discussed in terms of energy and nutrient needs throughout the menstrual cycle?
The progesterone, it is only pill. Does it have an effect on what's discussed in terms of the energy and nutrient needs throughout the menstrual cycle? I do think it will have. As I said before, these things are not written in stone yet, but if you look at the effect of progesterone and what you feel through that, we do expecting that you're probably going to have a little bit more work to do in terms of hydration. you're probably going to have a little bit more work to do in terms of preventing risk of hyponatremia. So make sure salt intake is quite evident. And you're probably going to have a little bit more work to do with carbohydrate intake and timely fueling of carbohydrate intake. As I said, it's not set in stone, these phases, but I would definitely look into those aspects during, if you're on a progesterone predominant pill.
Just before we pull up the next question, and Shona, if you also have a question that you've got your eye on, let me know. But everyone, we do realize that it is 9 o'clock, and it's been awesome. Time flew. I can't believe how quickly we got through an hour. We're not in a rush to leave you. There's tons of great questions coming through, so I'm sure Nicki and Shona are happy to spend a little bit more time chatting, but please stay with us if you can. Shones, if you don't have a question lined up that you're itching to answer, there is one through from Liesel.
No, you go ahead, Hale, so I can follow on after you.
So I think it's quite a general question that a lot of us would have considered and battled with, and I will put it up after I've read it. So Nicki, how to fuel during a work day? I don't wake up hungry and have a low appetite in summer during the day, training 4 to 5 hours running per week, trying Ensure shakes. Should I add them daily?
The right track. Thanks for that question, Lisa. But I think you're on the right track with the Ensure shakes. Remember, guys, that if you, especially this breakfast thing that you're talking about, it does. The less we eat, the less we want to eat. So the appetite actually does decrease if we don't eat. So I would definitely look at, if you don't have a good appetite, especially when you wake up in the morning, to have the shake. And maybe, I mean, Ensure is good. It's not that high in protein. I would add a little bit of protein to that shake. And then every 3 hours throughout the day, rather go into a snack mode than what you sit in front of a meal and you've got no appetite to eat that meal. So it would be less damaging to miss one little snack of 6 meals in a day than what it is to miss a whole meal if you only have 3 of those in a day. If you then combine the meals, combine the carb and protein mix, look at drinks, guys. So in summer, when you're not excessively hungry, or you can't, or if your day job is so busy that you can't really eat, have, for instance, if you have a cup of coffee, have a latte. So then it's a whole mug of coffee, a whole mug of milk in the coffee. That's your snack. It's done. Or otherwise, a little bits and pieces of nuts and dried fruit that maybe is on your desk where you're working. That visual cue to eat all the time, that would also be good. I mean, obviously portion it so that you know that I have to get through this little bucket through the end of the day of the nut fruit mixes. And then make use of quite a bit of salady things, because usually if you don't have that great appetite, the smell of stuff will also be quite severe. So if you can keep it cold as far as possible, something like a frozen yogurt works well. Just take a normal yogurt, put it in the freezer. Usually if it's that hot in summer, also quite an easy one then to eat little bits and pieces of throughout the day. But try to stick to eating something in the morning and every 3 hours throughout the day. And always combine the carb with the protein. You smash in a vegetable for lunch and one for supper. Good to go.
Quite a bit around the phases, and again, I think there were a couple of people who were quite interested in a bit of the menopause stuff, and we did touch a little bit on that in our previous webinar. But I'll raise a question here from Monique, because I think there's a nutrition and a training aspect to it. Monique is asking. She said, "I've just started menopause and I'm suddenly struggling with energy levels while running. What is the best to do?"
That you do fuel them right, and maybe also try, that's why I said maybe try a little bit of protein also in your pre-training meal as well as afterwards. Even, I don't know on what you're running, but even in the long runs, to make use of some protein source, especially something like nuts. I'm thinking of a peanut brittle, something like that. So the excessive tiredness is sometimes also a mental fatigue. And it's got to do with the serotonin and withdrawal from hormones. So if the hormones withdraw, there's a dump of serotonin, and therefore we sometimes feel this excessive tiredness. So it does make sense. We work with branched chain amino acids, leucine, and then a little bit of protein in the mix.
I wonder, following that,
go ahead.
sorry, that if Nicki hasn't kind of answered Karen's question then, and forgive me if it's Karen or Karen, which, if any of these phases that you explained, Nicki, is most like the postmenopausal person?
So that would, that would be the bleeding phase in phase 4. So where there's absolute, just a flat line of hormones. So that would be in the bleeding phase. So I think if one can get through the withdrawal symptoms of these hormones, I think we would be good. But I mean, that is a really hard time to get through with all the side effects of, the sweatiness, the body temperature that's changing, your appetite that's changing, the vasoconstriction that gives the headaches, all those kind of things. It's really a bad time to go through. But it's usually after menopause you will get the flat line of the hormones, which is pretty much phase 1 and 4. From phase 4 into phase 1.
Yeah, I think just following on from that other question from a training perspective for a menopausal one, that's not the focus of today's, but to combine it with the nutrition, I think is such an effective tool. So using the training modalities that you have and combining your timing of your nutrition around that is so vital for a peri and postmenopausal athletes. And so, then also utilizing a lot more recovery and therefore more adaptation, because we don't recover as quickly anymore. So we need to sort of play around with those times in which we recover. And so sort of adapting that ratio of work to rest or within your microcycles is also a really, really key idea. But the goal that I think I want to get across is just it's essentially a really good combination between your training and nutrition and the timing thereof that can assist with some of those things.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I think that is so important, guys, that the recovery is really, really important. It becomes more and more important as we go into menopause and get older. So therefore, the training program is probably going to have to change in terms of working in more recovery hours in there. And then the nutrition, the biggest change would be quite an increase in protein, much more protein than what you've been used to.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
sorry, because I know there are a lot of menopause questions. I'm not sure if you're going to bring one up, but there is just one here and I just want to raise it in case people are wondering. Julia's asking, she thought this was going to be the nutrition and menopause one. Did she miss it? She hasn't missed it, but there was this is more the nutrition one, and so everything on our YouTube page, all of those will be up there. So I'll pop up that link a little bit for you later, Julia. Thanks, Hales.
Yeah, thanks. We've had a lot of menopause questions come up, and I think which has been great is that Nicki has actually ended up answering a lot of those. But Julia, you're right. We will, and we do intend to go into more detail relating to menopause. I wanted to just click on Linda's question here because she's asked a few times regarding sort of fasting, and Nicki, if you can touch on intermittent fasting again. You did say that running fasted stresses the body. Is that by raising cortisol levels?
Yeah, so that is by raising cortisol levels. There is also, and I'm trying now to remember the peptide, but I will remember it soon. I did have it on paper somewhere. I just don't know where. But that basically is quite very, very sensitive to us running in a fasted state. And that will then actually make all these side effects that we have in terms of the hormonal side effects actually worse. Very much like when you run in a low energy availability, the same kind of cascade of stuff that's happening. So if we do, as I said, if we do 1 or 2 fasted runs, that should be okay. But most of the time, you're not going to get the same adaptation that they would get from a male body in the fasted run. In terms of intermittent fasting, because I'm not sure if the question is regarding running fasted or doing intermittent fasting, and I don't know if you're doing intermittent fasting where your run would fit in that day, if it's a fasted run, or do you run after your first meal? But it is that we don't want to put extra stress on the body, and especially if it's the high intensity sets, that we don't want to go into that fasted but also thinking of, even if I do a low intensity set and I do it in a fasted state, and there's a high one coming up, you will take longer to recover from even the low intensity in a fasted state. So you're not going to hit your numbers then in the high set as such, or it's going to be difficult. I think we need to understand that the body is something that you can't switch just stuff on and off. So if cortisol is then excreted and it's there, you can't just flip the switch and put it off. It's there. And it's going to take a while for it to break down. So that is why we can't, when we need to try and do things in a stable environment to support the training. So if you're going to, with your diet, then eat, then not eat, then I eat an apple, then it's Biltong, then it's that, you're definitely going to see the influence in your performance. So it is really, really important to keep it stable as much as possible, because if you don't do it, the body must do it, and it will. The body is very good with trying to get stabilization of stuff. It's really good with that. So it is important that if you then do intermittent fasting, try then to put your training in the period that you're actually eating, that we're sure that you train with food in the body, because that will then limit the negative effect of this breakdown that happens with the high cortisol, but also the suppression then of especially the menstrual hormones is suppressed during this low energy availability. I just
see Linda's followed up.
Menopause.
Sorry,
I also just want to I just want to refer people to that Fast Down 50 type of the talks that we have there, because there's also quite a bit of the menopausal nutrition applications in there.
Yes. Yeah. Linda's just given some context to her question, though. She's saying she does the 16-8 intermittent fasting, so she eats dinner very early, 5 p.m., so I can eat next morning by 9 a.m. That was just a follow-up to her question.
That's good. If we then can schedule the run after that, or then schedule late afternoon run that you still can get a recovery meal as your last meal of the day, and then go into the intermittent fast.
So I was just going to comment after that, Nicki, if some of what you were saying regarding intermittent fasting works differently for male versus female athletes. And before you answer that, I see Karen has asked here, she did say her sound hasn't been great, but did you say that the idea that some coaches suggest that some long runs under 90 minutes should be run without eating before is something that works for men but not women? I think it'd be interesting to tackle.
Yeah, that's an important question, and it seems to look like it. So a lot of these adaptations that take place is towards trying to upregulate fat metabolism, so that we better in fat metabolism, and therefore can oxidize more fat. I can save a little bit of the carbs, and therefore I can have a kick later on. And it seems that females, our bodies is already adapted towards better fat metabolism. We are better at fat metabolizing on the roads as such. So there is, I've remembered the name. The name is Kiss peptide. It's a peptide that actually is enhanced when we do faster training. So that will then actually influence menstrual pattern, that you actually suppress the LH and the follicle stimulating hormone, and that can actually lead to menstrual problems if you do these faster trainings. So the other part of the faster trainings is we don't see the performance enhancements yet. So we know there is adaptation because we see the markers in the blood, but we don't see it on the stopwatch yet. So the jury is really still out, but I would be very, very careful with faster runs in a sense of the long-term negative effect can outrun faster adaptation.
Okay, thanks. Shona, I think you could probably also relate into this. Zarina asks, I run 10Ks a week, do strength or Pilates twice a week and eat healthily. However, my weight doesn't shift. Any guidance? I'm 44 and find I have to eat less.
Sure. I mean, I think there's a lot there. It's not always easy to answer those sorts of questions without having a lot of information. I'd be keen to hear Nicki's input on that as well. But I think 44, there's a big chance that you're entering into some sort of perimenopause, which is very much when the hormones are sort of fluctuating quite a bit. And as a result, we would have a different effect on essentially weight loss and performance and all of that. And so for me, it wouldn't necessarily be about trying to have to eat less. I think I'll let Nicki maybe comment on that, but really just finding out, where you are essentially within your phases and your age and training accordingly to that. So, Nicki, from a dietitian side, from a nutritional side, that's from a training perspective, I think it's essentially trying to train specifically to where you're at within your life. And so for me, a lot of when you're in that perimenopause phase, it's the long, slow endurance stuff isn't always as effective as it used to be. And so adding in a little bit more high intensity and some strength training, but again, within caution and well progressed stuff, that would be a little bit more effective in terms of losing weight in those sorts of phases. Nicki, your perspective on the nutritional side?
Yeah, it is a difficult time, and it is difficult if you don't have the person in front of you to really evaluate what is going on. But in general, what I find in practice, usually this is the time where a lot of people start eating less and less and less and less, and we end up eating too little to lose the weight. So the idea, I think, what Shona said is maybe to look at the training. Intensity of training here becomes important. It's not comfortable because it's probably not stuff that we used to. So there's a long period of getting used to the load and so forth. But with that, so if you change your type of training, you probably change the energy output because we're not efficient in it. So if you've got to ask me all of a sudden that I must swim now, for instance, or whatever, and I haven't done it, I will be a messy swimmer, and therefore the energy expenditure will increase. So in that period where somebody like Shona will re-look at your training and maybe include the intensity training through that period, I will try to increase the food intake and especially then look at protein intake so that we can kickstart the basal metabolic rate again and see how we go from there. But please don't fall in the trap of eating less and less and less and less. That is often not the ideal. So maybe increase more nutrient-dense stuff, fruit and vegetables. Make sure you eat smaller portions maybe of the carbohydrate, but still include quality meat, and then put the protein in between your meals. Is it better to drink a whey protein or BCAAs after a long run? I would prefer the whey protein than the branched chain amino acids. Just because you've got an intact protein, which seems to absorb better, and because of taste, branched chain amino acids is not the nicest thing to take, and therefore you can also save a little bit of money because the whey protein would be cheaper. I always go from the standpoint that if you've got a gut, use it. So we've got a gut, put protein in so that the body can take whatever amino acids is necessary. If we eliminate and we only take certain amount of amino acids, guys, remember that in the body, the body must use a combination of amino acids to do the job it needs to do. So if we talk about the leucine or we talk about the branched chain amino acid, we recognize the role that amino acid has in the triggering of the muscle protein synthesis, but it's not that amino acid that builds the muscle. The other amino acids build the muscle. So it's always better to take whatever protein you take in a mix of protein.
Thank you, everyone. We are nearing on sort of closing up on our webinar, but I think we're going to take one, maybe two more questions. We've got one more vegetarian question, which I think we should tackle. It's from Lindsay, and she asks, any advice for a 25-year-old vegetarian? I'm pretty careful in eating enough protein, but I'm generally hungry throughout the day. Would you say this is a sign of too little protein?
Thanks for that question. Also difficult to evaluate if I don't have you in front of me, but it can be too little protein, but it can also be too little fat. So make sure that maybe some of your protein sources, that it has a higher fat content. I refer to nuts and seeds, and not getting all your protein necessarily from the legumes, because fat has an increase in satiety. Maybe also throwing in an avo or two, if you can do that. I don't know what vegetarian you are. If you do eat milk or milk products, I would do yogurts and milks. If it's a vegan, try to use soy milk in your diet as well.
Great. Thank you, Nicki. All right, everybody. We actually can't thank you enough for such good interaction tonight. The questions were flowing in from minute one. It's been unbelievable. So we do hope that we've been able to answer most of your questions. And I think between Nicki and Shona, it's been really, really thorough. So thanks for your input. And Nicki, thanks for just being so detailed on those phases through the menstrual cycle. A big part of what we're doing is really trying to open up these conversations on menstrual cycle, help female athletes train according to those cycles, and nutrition is obviously so key. So from my side, it's been a pleasure to host all of these questions. Shona, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add before we start to wrap up this evening.
But again, I think just the reiteration around how all these things kind of tie in together, and we don't look at them as singular aspects or silos, and how they all just need to kind of step in, how much the nutritional side has to complement what we're doing in the running. Otherwise, we just, or in training in general, running, strength, all of it. Otherwise, there's just, we won't be successful. So thanks, Hales, for that.
No, it's a pleasure. So for those of you that have been on tonight, this webinar will be available for you to watch again so that you can catch up on any details you may have missed. And then please, if you haven't already, go ahead and check out the Female Athletes YouTube channel, powered by Coach Parry. If you subscribe, then obviously you'll be able to get notifications for when more of these webinars are coming up. And it's specifically, as we said, the more menopause-specific nutrition content. But also what we've already covered. We've done quite a few webinars already to date. And we've also got quite a few content videos touching on lots of these subjects that have come up, from nutrition to strength training, lots on contraception and the different pill options. So it's really good if you can stay involved with us. And once again, thank you. It's been fantastic to spend time chatting to all of you. Thank you so much to Nicki and Shona for your time. And stay tuned. We'll see you again for our next webinar over the next few weeks.
Great. Thanks, Hales. Thanks, Nicki.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.